Hello, I'm Lukwesa Burak and welcome to Focus on Africa, our top stories. As more lockdowns come into effect across Africa, the UN warns that half of the jobs in the region could be lost. Zimbabweans stay at home as their lockdown begins in an economy already on its knees. Also in the programme, despite the downward trends, there is one business that's coming along swimmingly. We'll take you to Kenya's freshwater fisheries, where demand has rocketed as a direct result of coronavirus and China. Hello and thank you for joining us on Focus on Africa, coming to you from BBC World News. Well, the coronavirus pandemic continues to wreak havoc, forcing governments worldwide to extend lockdowns and introduce further emergency measures. Let's take a look then at the current global situation. There are now nearly 750,000 cases worldwide. Just over 35,000 people have died, and Europe continues to be the epicentre of the outbreak. Well, Spain's death toll has now more than doubled that of China's, with another 812 deaths in the past 24 hours. Flags are currently flying at half-mast in the capital, Madrid, and the surrounding region. This here is a field hospital that's been set up. It's being built in New York's Central Park to deal with the outbreak there as cases in the United States continue to rise. President Trump has extended social distancing guidelines to the end of April. You remember he'd originally said he hoped America could reopen for business by Easter, which is mid-April this year. Well, the latest figures from the continent show that just under 5,000 cases have been reported across at least 46 African countries. Lockdowns and restrictions are in place for many. And today, the United Nations Development Programme warned that the economic losses caused by the pandemic in developing countries could exceed $220 billion, and that includes the African continent. Well, right now, Africa itself is facing what's being described as a double jeopardy: weak health systems and a growing economic crisis. Even if Africa's cases stay low, and it's not expected that it'll come out of this economic crisis unscathed. Well, the UN Economic Commission for Africa says that the continent will need to spend up to $10.6 billion in bolstering its healthcare response. It's being estimated that nearly half of all jobs across the continent could be lost. And a key issue, of course, is rising debt. Countries including Angola, Gabon, Ethiopia, Ghana, Tunisia, Kenya and Zambia are most likely to suffer the most severe shock from debt distress. Well, let's discuss this further. Dr. Franny Lothier is an African finance expert and joins me now live from Washington. Dr. Lothier, thank you very much for joining us here on Focus on Africa. First off, we're hearing a lot of funding facilities that are being announced by various organisations. What's important, of course, is how that money is used. What is the best approach for financing African countries and their economies?
Hello, Lukwesa. It's a pleasure to join you. Africa at the moment needs flexible financing instruments because the impact of the coronavirus on Africa will be varied country by country, and it would require flexibility in the way the instruments are deployed. So first and foremost is the need for emergency funding to support the investments that are needed to deal with the current health crisis. For example, in many countries, you just mentioned Spain and Italy and others, the simple measures or cheaper measures that are available, like washing your hands, are very difficult for Africa because of the lack of water and sanitation and investments, particularly in urban areas, including rural areas as well. So emergency investments that could help fix some of these cheaper solutions like washing your hands, bringing portable water solutions or mobile water solutions, mobile sanitation could be very important. And then, of course, improving the capacity and performance of the health system. This is very critical. Learning the lessons from Ebola, which Africa handled very well, bringing in investments that would help spread the knowledge that Africa has on how to deal with pandemics, as we've seen in the case of Lagos, and using that to build hospital capacity and response capacity. Financing is also needed for trade in order to import the strategic imports that are needed at this time, whether it's medication, medical equipment, including the protective gear that is needed, but also funding for the informal sector, which is very important in Africa. Africa cannot use social distancing as well as other countries because of the dependence on the informal sector and because of the crowding in housing in the urban areas and even in the rural areas. So being able to support the informal sector during these critical times is important. And of course, because the global crisis is going to cause a decline in the GDP that was projected for Africa, that has broader implications in a number of areas, requiring the countries to find out other sources of economic growth. So financing that can support poverty-stricken areas, the kind of food and nutrition requirements that would be needed during this crisis time would be critical. And then because it's anticipated that investors who are very keen on Africa may now go elsewhere or stay at home until the crisis is over, that means there will be a challenge in finding alternative financing for Africa. So finding blended solutions where grant money can be blended with private investment so that those who are willing to go can be able to sustain the risks that are apparent now in the short term. And then the global crisis is creating also currency risks in the African markets. So you find, for example, it is more expensive now for African countries to import and to finance their debt because the local currency has deteriorated relative to the US dollar, which happens in most global recessions. So there is a need also for currency solutions. So entities that can offer sustainable and flexible currency risk mitigation solutions would be very much needed. I think that those are the key areas. And of course, because the major bottleneck right now is infrastructure and logistics, I mentioned water and sanitation, even basic electricity, which is needed to keep medication refrigerated. All those solutions are even more important now. And that's why Africa needs flexibility in the finance solutions available between market solutions, private investments, and blended finance, including proper use and blending of grant money.
Dr. Lautier, thank you very much for that comprehensive answer. Really appreciate it. Thank you, and do stay safe.
Thank you, same to you.
Well, Zimbabwe is beginning a 3-week lockdown in its fight against coronavirus. President Emmerson Mnangagwa has introduced measures which drastically restrict the movement of Zimbabweans. Banks, government offices and businesses are all shut. For many Zimbabweans already struggling with an economic crisis, the lockdown is the last thing they need. Shinganyoka reports now from Harare.
I'm in the heart of Zimbabwe's informal sector, a significant contributor to the economy. On a normal day, these stalls would be teeming with traders selling everything and anything under the sun. But because of the lockdown, they've been forced to stay home for the next 21 days. Many of them don't have savings and rely on daily earnings.
Even to want to be a vendor, who to sell to, who, no one. Now, we are dying. And much, and besides, the landlord, they need the money and end of the month. Yes, of course, I'm not going to give him because where I'm going to get it. But though, what for me to survive in my family? There is nothing.
The city centre is also largely deserted and most businesses are shut except for essential services like supermarkets and pharmacies. And the police are also out in numbers enforcing the lockdown, making sure that everyone who's on the streets has a right to be here. Zimbabwe has witnessed shutdowns before, several in recent years due to political unrest, but one of this nature, public health matters, is unprecedented.
Yes, you can see the place is clean. If For 21 days, there is no date. Maybe we are going to see changes. So I'm true it's going to work.
So now we are on our way to go home and stay in our houses.
Zimbabwe is an uncharted territory, an already struggling economy with little to no safety nets for millions of informal traders and no bailout planned for businesses. Many would agree that this lockdown is necessary to stop this pandemic before it devastates an already fragile healthcare system. But in the coming weeks, Zimbabwe will have to count the economic cost, a cost it can scarcely afford, as many businesses struggle to reopen. Shingai Nyoka, BBC News, Harare.
Well, South Africa's lockdown began on Thursday night of last week, you'll remember, and it seems that the authorities there have been struggling to get some people to observe the restrictions. Whilst many did follow instructions to stay at home except for essential journeys, queues again formed at supermarkets in the biggest of the cities over the weekend. Well, the BBC's Nomsa Masego is live for us from Johannesburg. Hi there, Nomsa. So there have been some problems and we've seen lots of videos on social media between the police and members of the public. How are things going?
Just a few minutes ago, President Cyril Ramaphosa started addressing the nation, basically thanking South Africans and saying that for the most part, many South Africans have heeded the call to stay home and make sure that they keep to social distancing. But also there have been problems, as you say. There have been videos that we have been seeing on social media of the police and the military assaulting people and torturing some people because they have not heeded the call to stay home. In fact, in the east of Johannesburg, at the Ekurhuleni municipality, there was a police officer who was arrested there this morning along with a private security guard. They are accused of killing a man, shooting and killing him while he was at his home on his veranda. So there are investigations that are going to be taking place there to ascertain what exactly happened, because people are allowed to be inside their yards. They don't necessarily need to be inside the house, but they can be outside. And there were queues, of course. It was pension payday here in South Africa, and there were queues from the elderly all over the country. In fact, I got to speak to some of them and I asked them how they were feeling about the lockdown and how it was treating them. And many of them said that it was reminiscent of the old days of apartheid. But this time around, they understand why the government of the day has taken such a decision, because it is for health reasons and not for racial segregation.
And so we're looking at quite a few elements of the impact on economies, African economies this week. Just remind us of any stimulus packages that South Africa has announced.
Well, South Africa is currently facing a situation of a double whammy, so to speak, because not only is the country facing a recession at the moment, but it has been downgraded by ratings agency Moody's to junk status. Just recently, the Finance Minister Tito Mboweni announced that he was considering approaching the IMF and the World Bank to try and get some money or to relieve the economy that is so much under pressure. But there are some stimulus packages that have been put in place to help small businesses, which are going to be hugely affected because of this lockdown.
OK, Nomsa Masego, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. You're watching Focus on Africa, coming to you from BBC World News. Do stay with us, because still to come, in a few hours, large areas of Nigeria are set to enter their lockdown. We hear from the streets of Lagos, the epicentre of the country's own outbreak. Stay with us. Hello there and welcome back. I'm Lukwesa Burak. We're going to cross to Nigeria now, where huge parts of Africa's most populous nation are also going into lockdown. Movement of all people in Lagos, Abuja and Ogun State will be restricted for 2 weeks. Chichi Zundu has more.
We are expecting solution from our government.
For people here, coronavirus is a virus of the privileged.
People are dying and suffering.
Fear is gripping Lagos.
A lot of young guys that they work, daily work and eat. If they don't have things to do, they might fall into another line. So we are appealing to our government to please do some relief support to masses.
There's no how you want to stay in the house without money. That's it. You don't want us to work, you don't want movement, and you are not providing anything.
I know they are trying their possible best for us, for the disease not to get to us, but they should just give us the relief packages. Please, I'm urging the president.
That support was outlined by President Muhammadu Buhari last night. It was the first time he'd addressed Nigeria since the pandemic started.
To date, we have introduced healthcare measures, border security, fiscal and monetary policies in our response. We shall continue to do so as the situation unfolds. Some of these measures will surely cause major inconveniences to many citizens, but these are sacrifices we should all be willing and ready to make for the greater good of our country.
Lagos, Abuja, Ogun states from 11 p.m. tonight are in lockdown for 14 days initially. Citizens are ordered to stay at home, businesses to close.
This is one of Lagos's most popular markets, and normally you cannot move for the amount of people working and shopping here. But the government says that needs to stop because Lagos is the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak, and these next 2 weeks are crucial in stopping its spread.
Officials say the number of confirmed cases could be higher than reported. That's why they need the time to trace the thousands who've been in contact with positive individuals. Life as Lagos knows it is changing fast. Like many parts of Africa, preventing the spread of coronavirus is a race against time. But getting a nation to change its behaviour, its culture, its tradition overnight could be Nigeria's saving grace in containing COVID-19. Chichi Azundu, BBC News.
Now, across Africa, as we've been saying, the coronavirus outbreak has put a real strain on many sectors of the economy, bringing many businesses and communities to a halt. But not all industries are actually suffering. In some parts of Kenya, sales of fresh fish have risen dramatically over the past few weeks as a direct result of the crisis, a much-needed boost to an industry that had been struggling until now. Ferdinand Omondi reports on the situation in one community in Western Kenya.
For local fishermen at Dunga Beach on the shores of Lake Victoria, business is booming. Sales of fresh fish in Dunga shot up by around 40% in just 2 weeks because of coronavirus. Less fish is being imported from China, the source of the outbreak, and people are also nervous of buying any Chinese produce that does arrive. Both these factors have increased customer demand for fresh lake fish.
The fishermen are really now smiling at the Lake Victoria region because we are receiving more visitors. Right now, when you see Dunga is really crowded with a lot of the residents of Kisumu coming to buy the fresh fish because people fear the Chinese box fish due to the coronavirus.
Before the coronavirus outbreak, the local fishermen were struggling to sell their catch. Fish sold from the lake costs about twice as much as the fish from China. The much lower prices of the imported fish meant that in most cases, the local fishermen would either end up eating their catch themselves or sometimes give up to half of it away. But now customers are willing to buy the fish at any cost.
With the presence of the coronavirus, those people who are selling China fish have got some disadvantage because at the moment they are unable to do their business. And I, as the person who is selling the lake fish, now I've got the advantage to sell fish with the price I want.
Kenya imported more than $23 million worth of frozen fish from China in 2018. Those in the industry around Africa's largest lake have long complained that the cheap imports were harming local trade. Chinese fish usually made up about 50% of the market, but this had now fallen. But the high local prices are making it difficult for some business people to make a decent profit.
As women trading in Chinese fish in Kisumu, we see when the Chinese boxed fish arrives here. We do get it cheaply, and when it is not there, we get this fish from our own lake. But it's very expensive. That is the reason we want the Chinese fish in supply, as well as that from our own lake, so that as we do business, we don't feel the burden.
Chinese fish hasn't been imported since November. There are worries that local fishermen won't be able to keep up with the new demand for fresh fish. But for now, at least, they are making the most of the surge in trade.
What a fascinating report, and there is the gentleman that brought it to us, Ferdinand Omondi, speaking to us live now from Nairobi. And Ferdinand, you know, it's a positive economic story there coming to us from Kenya. But in terms of the general economic situation, just talk us through it.
Generally, it's just about only the fish industry that is doing well, really, and that's just in Lake Victoria. And most of Kenya businesses are shutting down. Hotels have laid off workers in the hundreds. Some have completely told them, go home, we do not know that we'll call you back. Some of Kenya's biggest lodges are shutting down for an unknown number of months. Private businesses as well are now being affected greatly, including restaurants which were closed, only accepting takeaways. And today I went to the supermarket. By 4 p.m. they are all closed because now Kenya has a 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew, so there are much fewer hours for people to work. And generally the outlook isn't good from the business community, and most of them are hoping that the government will announce much bigger bailouts than have been previously put forward by the banks.
We'll come to that in a moment, Ferdinand, but we spoke to our colleague Nomsa Maseko in Johannesburg a few minutes ago, and she told us stories about the security forces and their influence on the streets. Anything similar happening in Kenya?
It was a disaster and very chaotic last Friday at the beginning of the curfew. I don't know exactly what the Kenya police were trying to achieve, but thousands of people who were caught out still from before they could get home, and there were videos shared online of beatings of men, women, defenseless children, all in the name of trying to get them home in time. At the Kenya Ferry in Mombasa, where there were hundreds of people who were stranded and could not cross over to the south coast, and that being the only way they could cross, they had to tear gas the people. The defense from the police spokesman is that some of the people got rowdy and apparently hurled stones, but really most human rights organizations and even political leaders have said that there is no justification. Last night, we could see that there were videos being shared of some policemen entering a residential area and still beating up somebody. And there are even reports in one of the local media that in the coast area, one of the people who was beaten actually died from his injuries and not from the coronavirus. So right now there's still widespread condemnation, but also it has also instilled lots of fear among the people. And going forward, we're seeing a lot more people getting into their homes well in time, respecting the curfew, but also fearing the police.
Ferdinand, there was a report that's come out today from the UNDP, and one of the countries it mentions as possibly suffering the most from a debt shock because of coronavirus is Kenya. You touched on stimulus. What else has the Kenyan government put in place?
Well, today the Kenya government has formed an emergency fund that will be drawn from the exchequer and donations, but the president just said that this fund will be made up mainly from voluntary pay cuts from senior civil servants as well as donations from society. So there isn't really hundreds of millions as many people are expecting to bail out the people. There have been agreements with banks that they be able to speak the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises, to postpone their loans or to renegotiate their loans. But there isn't really that big bailout like the other countries, let's say the US, and which have done, and which the business community is really clamoring for here. So still at very uncertain times. But perhaps because of the debts that Kenya has, billions or millions of dollars, especially from China for the construction of the standard gauge railway and other projects. And these are some of the things that maybe perhaps is holding the government from committing a lot more money, which they may not have in the first place.
Ferdinand Omondi, thank you very much for that picture of what's going on in Kenya. Speaking to us from Nairobi. Don't forget that we will have plenty more coming up here on BBC World News. You can keep up to date with all the African news. Just head to the BBC World News website. I'm Lukwesa Burak. I will see you tomorrow. Stay safe. Bye-bye.